I stood in the shadows of Christie's auction house, my heart a metronome of vengeance beneath the sleek black dress I'd chosen for the occasion. The chandelier above sparkled like polished judgment, casting fractured light onto polished marble floors. My parents had just stepped through the grand entrance, oblivious. And why wouldn't they be? As far as they knew, their only daughter was still toiling away in Chicago, quietly curating someone else's art, certainly not creating it. But the truth was, they were here tonight to bid on my work. They just didn't know it yet. My name is Evelyn Clarke. At least, it used to be. To the art world, I'm EM, the elusive, faceless painter whose abstract canvases now fetch millions at auction. But 15 years ago, I was just the daughter who disappointed them, who traded courtrooms and case law for canvases and chaos. It was a November morning, gray and unforgiving. I had come home from art school for Thanksgiving break, thinking I might finally share something that mattered to me. 2 years of sketches, oils, acrylics, all stacked carefully in my childhood studio. I walked in, humming, holding coffee in one hand and a wrapped gift for my mother in the other. I stopped cold. The room was empty. No easel, no brushes, no canvases, just a faint scent of turpentine, and silence so loud it rang in my ears. Then I heard the sound of the garage door grinding shut. I ran downstairs, and there it was. My life, my vision, my voice, stuffed in black trash bags like rotting leftovers. My father stood beside the overflowing garbage bin, his tie still perfectly knotted, one hand on his hip, the other holding a folded newspaper. "This ends now," he said, like a judge handing down a sentence. "No more wasting time on worthless scribbles. You're going to law school like we agreed." My mother stood behind him in a cream cashmere sweater and pearls, nodding like she was at a country club luncheon. "Darling, this little hobby, it's not a career. The Clarks are lawyers. Always have been." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I reached into the trash, my fingers shaking, and pulled out the only canvas that hadn't been slashed by rain or split by anger. It was my favorite, midnight blue clashing against veins of gold, thick layers of grief and fury captured in color. I held it close to my chest like a wounded animal and turned away without another word. That was the day Evelyn Clarke died. I moved to Brooklyn under a new name, rented a 300-square-foot studio apartment where mold crept up the walls and the radiator sounded like it coughed in its sleep. I worked as a gallery assistant by day and painted by night. Starving artist? That was romanticized nonsense. I wasn't starving, I was rebuilding. Every brushstroke, every sleepless night was mortar for the wall I would one day stand behind, high above their scorn. My first break came when a local gallery owner walked in during one of my late-night cleanup shifts. He saw the canvas I was about to throw out, an early version of what would become my redemption series, and asked to buy it on the spot. 6 months later, a collector offered me $90,000 for another piece. But I never showed my face, never gave my real name, never allowed my past to catch up with my paint. The anonymity became part of my mystique, the faceless genius behind the abstract madness. It was safer that way. And yet here I was, 15 years later, watching the very people who'd crushed me walk into a room full of my work, smiling, admiring, getting ready to spend a fortune on the same worthless scribbles they'd thrown into the trash. I adjusted the dark wig over my hair and tightened the straps of my heels. From the reflection in the glass, I saw my father glance at a catalog, his brow furrowed, probably calculating how much of the family fund he could invest in an EM. Original. My mother linked arms with him, her lips curled in polite awe as she gestured toward one of the centerpiece canvases. They were admiring my pain, and they didn't even know it. A hand touched my elbow. It was David, my longtime assistant, and the only person alive who knew the truth. "They're heading into Gallery 3, he whispered. It's time. I didn't move right away. My fingers grazed the invitation in my clutch, the one they'd received weeks ago, the one I made sure found its way to their mailbox in Connecticut. I knew they'd come. They always chased prestige. But this wasn't about prestige. It was about the truth, and about reclaiming something no one else had the right to define: my worth. I took a breath, long and deliberate, then walked toward the gallery like a ghost returning to the scene of her murder. Except this time, the ghost had teeth. Tomorrow, the world would know who EM really was. But tonight I watched them, like a storm watches the shoreline, and I didn't feel sorry, not even a little. The night I left Connecticut, I didn't cry. I didn't even say goodbye. I boarded a late train bound for Penn Station with nothing but a duffel bag, my ruined jeans streaked with paint, and that one surviving canvas tucked under my arm like a lifeline. As the suburbs blurred into city lights, I stared out the window and made myself a promise. They may have erased my name, but they'd never erase my voice. I found a sublet in Brooklyn Heights. It was barely larger than a walk-in closet and smelled like old plaster and roaches. But it had a north-facing window, and in that light, everything felt possible again. I slept on a mattress on the floor, ate cold rice and canned soup for weeks, and spent my nights painting by lamplight until my fingers cramped. Every dollar I earned from cataloging artists' collections at the gallery went into two things: rent and supplies. No luxuries, no distractions. Just canvas, pigment, and silence. I worked under the radar. No portfolio, no social media. I signed my earliest pieces simply M, a quiet rebellion, the beginning of my metamorphosis. The gallery owner, a chain-smoking minimalist named Clarice, noticed one of my works leaning behind a trash bin near the back door. She pulled it out, studied it under the flickering track light, and asked, "Whose is thee?" That sale, $800 cash handed to me in a brown envelope, felt more real than anything I'd known in 20 years. She offered me wall space for one piece. It sold in 3 days. But I still wasn't ready to be seen. The pain was too raw, too close. I hadn't just been dismissed by my parents. I had been discarded. Tossed aside like cheap wrapping paper the moment I stopped looking like the daughter they wanted. I knew that if I re-emerged too soon, they'd find a way to co-opt the narrative, claim they'd always supported me, turn my triumph into their redemption arc. So, I built a persona. EM wasn't just a signature. It was armor. I created a fake assistant email account. I let Clarice handle sales and refused interviews. My buyers never met me. The anonymity gave the art an edge, a mythos. People projected whatever they wanted onto my work. Pain, rebirth, rebellion. And I let them, all while watching from the sidelines. I monitored my parents through social media and town gossip. My mother joined a historical preservation board. My father gave a TEDx talk on legacy through leadership. Every time they posted holiday photos in matching sweaters or boasted about Evelyn's curating career to their smug country club friends, I wanted to scream. But I didn't. Instead, I painted harder. The Redemption series was born in that pressure cooker of grief and fire. 12 massive canvases, each one a war between texture and absence, light clawing its way out of shadow. I used knives instead of brushes, nails instead of palette tools. It was messy, violent, personal, and it was mine. By the time I'd sold 5 pieces to collectors in London, Berlin, and Tokyo, I knew the endgame wasn't just money. It was revelation. I didn't want their apology. I wanted the look in their eyes when they realized that the art they dismissed had eclipsed everything they ever hoped I'd become. David came into the picture around year 5. He was fresh out of NYU, hungry to manage someone disruptive. I hired him under strict conditions. He'd speak for me, handle all communications, and never reveal my identity. Not to clients, not to press, not even to his own mother. He agreed. We worked like spies. Every exhibit was carefully orchestrated. Every sale came with a confidentiality clause. I knew one day the curtain would fall, but I wanted it to fall on my terms, with the biggest audience possible. So I waited, and I planned. I made sure the invite list for the Christie's auction included my parents. I knew the language that would bait them: generational collection, exclusive opportunity, culturally significant work by a groundbreaking American artist. Of course, they RSVP'd. They couldn't resist being part of something elite. What they didn't know was that every painting in the Redemption series was tied to a memory I'd buried. One depicted the night they threw out my art. Another, the day my mother told me I'd be prettier if I smiled more. A third, the moment I signed my college withdrawal letter and mailed it without telling them. Art had become my confession booth, and they were about to walk into my church. David helped me prepare the final piece, an unreleased canvas that had never been seen before. It was different from the others. Raw, stripped down. Just 3 violone stroes of gold over a sea of stormy black. I called it Inheritance. It would be unveiled during the final moments of the auction, after my identity was revealed. It wasn't about revenge anymore. Not exactly. It was about truth. About making them see me, really see me, for the first time in their lives. And when they did, it wouldn't be in a courtroom, or over dinner, or in a phone call. It would be on a stage, under spotlight, in front of collectors, critics, and the press. I would paint my story in public, and they would have to sit there and watch every stroke. And that, to me, was justice. They strolled through Gallery 3 like they owned it. My father adjusted his cufflinks as if the lighting in the room had personally offended him, while my mother clasped her clutch with both hands, pausing dramatically in front of each painting like she was on a guided tour of Versailles. I watched from behind a partition wall, sipping mineral water to keep my hands from shaking. The Redemption series lined the walls. 12 canvases hung like silent witnesses to my undoing. The guests murmured admiration, collectors scribbled notes, a woman from art forum whispered into a mic. But my parents? They weren't there for the art. They were there for the validation. "This one," my mother said, stopping in front of fragmentation. "It's powerful, don't you think?" My father nodded, flipping through the glossy auction catalog. "Bold composition, aggressive palette. Definitely a centerpiece." I nearly choked. He was quoting the critic from The New Yorker, the same man who once stared at my paint-splattered jeans and said, "No real artist looks like that." My mother leaned in to inspect the signature, a subtle EM etched near the bottom in graphite. "You know, the artist is supposed to be anonymous," she said in that airy, performative way she used at dinner parties. "But rumor has it it's a young man from Spain, or maybe Berlin." She paused, then laughed. "Of course no real woman would produce something so emotionally violent." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I inhaled slowly, let it burn on the way out. They kept walking, moving from piece to piece with the detachment of people shopping for wallpaper. Every now and then, my mother would whisper something about the Hamptons house or our Aspen getaway. My father, meanwhile, kept checking the bidding estimates, smirking when the assistant mentioned the starting price, $5 million per canvas. "Ridiculous," he muttered. "People will throw money at anything with a story." And yet he made notes in the margins. The kind of notes he used to make during court prep, calculated, precise, always with an angle. They didn't love the art. They didn't even understand it. They wanted it because other people wanted it. Because owning an EM meant status, prestige, proof that they were tastemakers. Ironic, really, considering the fact that just a decade ago, they'd told people at church I was taking time off to reassess, as if I'd been a failed startup, as if I hadn't burned my fingers layering oil over charcoal, mixing grief into pigment. You said Evelyn was working in Chicago, right? I heard someone ask them. My mother lit up. Yes, she manages private collections now. Very responsible work. Nothing dramatic, just practical, quiet. She always made quiet sound like sainthood, like resignation was something noble. Of course, she continued. She never really had the eye for creating. That was just a phase. I closed my eyes and counted backward from 10. The nerve, the absolute audacity of them to stand in a room full of my work and still peddle the same sanitized narrative, like I disappeared into some Midwest archive and left my wild ambitions behind like a dirty secret. And worse, people believed them. Why wouldn't they? My mother wore her pearls like armor. My father quoted Supreme Court rulings over cocktails. They were polished, practiced, perfect. Their lie was so seamless, it wrapped itself around me like a noose. David appeared beside me, his voice barely above a whisper. Do you want to leave? I shook my head. No, let them bask. This is their curtain call, whether they know it or not. A few moments later, a representative from Christie's approached them with the poise of a maitre d'. Mr. and Mrs. Clarke, I understand you're interested in bidding on several pieces this evening. My father raised a brow. We are. The artist's anonymity is intriguing. There's a certain mystique. My mother smiled. We're redecorating the study in our summer home. An EM would look incredible over the fireplace. Indeed, the rep replied, though I must warn you, there's already significant international interest, and EM has never revealed their identity until now. That caught my father's attention. He adjusted his tie and squared his jaw. Let me guess, young genius with a tortured past? That always drives up the price. It was almost funny how he treated someone else's trauma like marketing copy, like a feature in a brochure. He had no idea he was about to choke on the punchline. David leaned in again. You ready for tomorrow? I've been ready for 15 years, I said, my voice low, my spine steel. They just don't know it yet. As the gallery lights dimmed for closing, my parents turned toward the exit, still blissfully ignorant, still intoxicated by the illusion of control. They thought they were circling a prize, but really they were walking into a reckoning, and I would be holding the mirror. The morning of the unveiling, Manhattan pulsed with anticipation. The sky outside Christie's was overcast, as if the city itself held its breath. Luxury cars lined the curb, photographers jostled for position, and security buzzed around like bees guarding the hive. Inside, velvet ropes cordoned off the main gallery, where the final piece of the Redemption series, Inheritance, waited under a black silk shroud. My heels clicked softly on the marble floor as I passed collectors, curators, and journalists who had flown in from all over the world. No one noticed me, just the way I wanted it. Last night, I had painted until dawn, not for comfort, but for clarity, closure. Every motion with the brush had peeled away another layer of bitterness, another scar no one could see but me. Backstage, David reviewed the script for the press announcement. His hands trembled slightly, despite the fact that he'd been managing high-profile events for years. Once we start, there's no going back, he warned. I know, I replied, but this isn't about revenge anymore. It's about the truth. The auditorium filled quickly. My parents arrived early, seated front and center, dressed as if for a gala. My father wore the same smug expression he'd perfected in courtrooms. My mother smiled graciously at anyone who glanced her way. The two of them looked so proud, so self-assured, as if they were stakeholders in a legacy they had nothing to do with. The lights dimmed, the room hushed. Marcus, the gallery director, stepped up to the podium. His voice, deep and deliberate, echoed through the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. Before we begin the auction, we have something unprecedented to share. For the first time since their debut, the artist behind the Redemption series has chosen to come forward." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras clicked. My father leaned forward, visibly intrigued. "But first," Marcus continued, "we'd like to show you where it all began." Two assistants wheeled out a single frame under protective glass. A canvas worn by time, slightly warped, with edges frayed from years of neglect. It was the painting I'd pulled from the trash all those years ago. The very one my father had condemned. The one they'd discarded without hesitation. Marcus turned to the audience. "This piece was once deemed worthless. It nearly ended up in a landfill, but instead, it sparked a transformation. What you're about to witness is not just an artistic evolution, but a deeply personal reclamation." Silence fell again. Then I stepped onto the stage. No wig, no sunglasses, no armor. Just me. There was a beat where time froze. Then my mother's breath hitched audibly. My father went pale. "Good morning," I said calmly, gripping the microphone. "Some of you may know me as EM. But before I was that, I was Evelyn Clarke, daughter of Douglas and Margaret Clarke, sitting right there in the front row." The audience collectively turned. I kept going. 15 years ago, the two people who raised me stood in our garage and tossed away every painting I had created. They told me it was a waste. They told me I'd never be successful. That art was foolish. They erased my dreams with garbage bags. My father stood up. "This isn't the time or place." "Oh, I think it is," I said, locking eyes with him. "You see, all this, every painting, every exhibit, every headline, was built from the ashes of that moment. The Redemption series, it's not about forgiveness. It's about rising from what was thrown away." I gestured to inheritance, still cloaked beside me. "This final piece, it isn't for sale. None of these are. They'll be donated to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, permanently installed with the full story behind them." Whispers erupted around the room. My mother looked as though she might faint. I inhaled slowly, then added, "And the proceeds from tonight's event, what you all thought would be an auction, will fund a foundation for emerging artists from underprivileged backgrounds, ones who, like me, were told they'd never amount to anything." My father's mouth opened, but no words came out. I continued, "This isn't about punishing anyone. It's about creating something from the pieces left behind. You tried to break me. Instead, you built me." Then, with a nod, the silk sheet was pulled away from inheritance. A hush spread across the room. 3 jagged streaks of gold carved through a deep black void. Raw, unapologetic, and utterly unmistakable. Someone in the back clapped, then another, until the entire gallery was filled with thunderous applause. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was staring at the two people who had once dismissed my dreams with a smirk. Now they couldn't even look at me. They had come expecting to acquire a prize, a conversation piece for their next cocktail party. Instead, they witnessed the moment their version of history collapsed. And this time, I wasn't in the shadows. They didn't approach me afterward. Not right away. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by critics, collectors, and flashing bulbs, but all I could feel was the absence, like something had been pulled from under me, and I hadn't noticed until now. Not pain, not grief, just a stillness, a quiet recognition that I had outgrown them. They were shrinking, these two people who once loomed so large in my world. My father, the invincible attorney, who'd once dictated my future like a sentencing. My mother, all pearls and posture, who'd whispered condescension like perfume into every room we entered. They sat there, faces slack, applause echoing around them, and for once, they had nothing to say. A week later, the letter started, an embossed envelope with my full name in her handwriting, then a call from a number I hadn't saved in years. I didn't answer, not out of cruelty, but because I didn't owe them anything anymore. The media had exploded after the reveal. "EM is Evelyn Clarke" became a trending headline. Some called it performance art. Others called it poetic justice. My inbox overflowed with interview requests, endorsement deals, even invitations to speak at Ivy League symposiums. I accepted none. Instead, I focused on launching the Clarke Initiative. Yes, I kept the name, because I would redefine what it meant. The foundation offered grants to young artists whose families couldn't or wouldn't support their dreams. Kids from Queens, Detroit, Tulsa. Teens painting in basements, sculpting with recycled plastic, sketching between shifts at diners. For every application, I saw a glimpse of the girl I used to be. And this time, someone was choosing them. The Redemption series remained at the Met, untouched by price tags or ownership. School groups visited daily. Professors wrote papers. A child once left a sticky note beneath inheritance that read, "I want to paint like this when I grow up." I kept it taped inside my studio closet like a prayer. Eventually, my parents showed up at my gallery. They waited until closing hours. David buzzed them in and gave me the choice. I said yes. They looked older than I remembered, softer. Not in the way people mellow with age, but in the way you realize concrete was always just brittle stone under pressure. My mother was the first to speak. "You've created something remarkable." I didn't respond. She glanced down, then back at me. "We were wrong. About all of it." My father stood beside her, his voice lower than I'd ever heard it. "I didn't understand. That wasn't an excuse. It's just the truth." I studied them, the way her hands twisted the strap of her handbag, how he couldn't meet my eyes for more than a few seconds. "What do you want from me?" I asked, not unkindly. He opened his mouth, closed it again. "Forgiveness. Maybe just a place in your life." I thought about it, about every Thanksgiving I spent alone, about crying over rejection letters while pretending not to care, about scraping together rent by selling sketches at flea markets. I looked them in the eyes and said, "I didn't reveal myself so I could be accepted. I did it because I no longer need to be." My mother's eyes welled. She didn't wipe the tears. Maybe for once, she wanted to feel them. "I hope you're proud," I added quietly. "Because I'm not bitter. Just finished." They left without fanfare. No shouting, no drama. Just two people carrying the weight of a story they'd never expected to hear. And me? I went back to painting. There was peace in it now. Not the kind born from revenge, but the kind that follows truth. My hands no longer shook when I picked up a brush. I no longer painted to prove I mattered. I painted because I knew I did. Some nights, I sit on the balcony of my studio, overlooking the city that raised me better than they ever did. I think about the girl I used to be, the one with calloused fingers and paint under her nails, trying to believe in a future that felt miles away. She wouldn't recognize this version of herself, but I hope she'd be proud. I hope you would too. Because here's the thing, family doesn't always break your heart in dramatic ways. Sometimes it's quiet. A look, a dismissive comment, a trash bag full of your dreams. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't scream or beg or fight back. Sometimes the greatest act of defiance is to become everything they told you couldn't. So now, I ask you, have you ever had to reclaim yourself from the people who raised you? And if so, what masterpiece will you make from the pieces they tried to throw away? Evelyn.